Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Rome after midnight. The great city has finally begun to quiet. The voices of merchants have faded from the streets. The lamps along the narrow roads burn softly, casting small pools of golden light across the ancient stones. The crowds are gone. The market stalls are closed. And somewhere beyond the walls of the city, the night stretches quietly beneath a dark Roman sky. But Rome was never truly silent. Even at this late hour, thousands of people were still awake. A servant carrying a small lamp through a dark courtyard. A traveler searching for somewhere to sleep. A baker preparing tomorrow's bread before dawn. And behind the walls of quiet Roman homes, families were settling into another night. Tonight, we are going to walk slowly through that city, not the Rome of emperors and battles, but the Rome that existed after the crowds had gone home. The Rome of ordinary people, dimly lit streets, warm kitchens, quiet rooms, and long nights beneath the stars. So let the noise of the modern world fade away for a little while. Take a slow breath and imagine that for tonight, Rome is still awake. Before we continue our quiet walk through ancient Rome, if you're enjoying this journey, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And here's a little question for you. What do you think was the most dangerous thing about walking through Rome at night? Take a guess, leave your answer in the comments, and we'll find out soon. Even at this late hour, thousands of people were still awake. Most of Rome had begun to quiet down, but quiet did not mean empty. Behind closed doors, small lamps were still burning. In kitchens, people were finishing the last tasks of the day. In workshops, a few workers were still cleaning their tools. And in the darker parts of the city, people were still moving through the streets. Rome was enormous. And because it was enormous, it never really went to sleep all at once. One neighborhood might already be silent, while somewhere else, someone was only just beginning their work. A baker preparing tomorrow's bread, a servant carrying water, a traveler looking for somewhere to rest, a worker returning home long after sunset. The city had its own rhythm. And at night, that rhythm became slower, quieter, softer. A few streets away, a baker was already preparing tomorrow's bread. Inside his small bakery, the air was warmer than outside. The oven had been burning for hours. Its heat filled the room, while a small oil lamp provided just enough light to see the work table. The baker pressed his hands into the dough, slowly, again and again. There was nothing glamorous about the work. It was simply necessary. Bread was one of the most important everyday foods in the Roman world. For ordinary people, it could form a substantial part of the daily diet. And that meant that someone had to make it every morning, even when the city was asleep, even when the streets were dark. Someone had to begin before dawn, so the baker worked quietly, his hands covered in flour, while outside Rome slowly disappeared into the night. The sound of the dough against the wooden table was soft, almost rhythmic. Press, fold, turn, press, fold, turn. And perhaps after so many nights of doing the same thing, the baker no longer thought much about it. It was simply his life. Outside the bakery, a traveler continued along the street. He had arrived late, too late for the busy daytime streets, too late for the easy warmth of a crowded inn. The lamps were becoming fewer now. He passed one closed doorway, then another. The city looked different at night. During the day, Rome could feel overwhelming. Thousands of voices, animals, carts, shopkeepers, workers, people pushing through narrow streets. But after dark, many of those sounds disappeared. The buildings remained, but the people became quieter, and the traveler could finally hear his own footsteps. They echoed softly against the stones. He stopped beneath a lamp, looked down one street, then another. Somewhere nearby, a door opened. Warm light briefly spilled onto the pavement. Then the door closed again, and the street returned to darkness. This is something easy to forget when we think about ancient cities. People did not experience history as history. The baker did not know that one day people would study Rome. The traveler did not know that the streets beneath his feet would become archaeological evidence. The family behind the closed door did not know that their ordinary evening might someday help us imagine what Roman life was like. To them, it was simply another night, another evening, another meal, another conversation, another night to get through, and then another morning. That is what makes these quiet moments interesting. History is not only made of emperors and battles, it is also made of people closing their doors, needing bread, carrying lamps, and falling asleep. Farther down the street, the last traces of the day's activity were disappearing. A wooden shutter moved gently in the night breeze. Somewhere behind a wall, a dog shifted in its sleep. An oil lamp flickered, then steadied. The street became quieter, and for a few moments, there was almost nothing to hear, only the distant sound of footsteps, the faint crackle of a flame, the soft movement of air between the buildings and above the rooftops, the Roman night sky. By now, much of Rome had begun to disappear behind closed doors. The streets were quieter, the lamps were fewer, and inside the homes that lined the narrow roads, another part of the night was beginning. For many ordinary Romans, home was not a large place. Some lived in modest houses. Others lived in apartments built into tall apartment blocks known as insulae. These buildings could rise several stories above the street. From below, they might have looked like simple walls and windows. But behind those walls were hundreds of small lives, families, workers, children, tenants who had come to Rome from somewhere else, people who had spent the entire day surrounded by noise, and now wanted nothing more than a little quiet. Imagine one of those buildings tonight. The lower floors are still faintly illuminated. A doorway stands open for a moment. Someone enters carrying a small lamp. The light moves across the wall, then disappears. Above them, another window is still glowing. Someone is awake, perhaps preparing a meal, perhaps speaking quietly with a neighbor, perhaps simply sitting beside a small lamp, waiting for sleep, and several floors above the street. Another family has already gone to bed. The sounds of the city reach them only faintly. A distant footstep, a dog, the creak of wood, then silence. The Romans had no modern insulation, no electric lighting, no central heating, no glass windows that could simply be closed with the touch of a hand. Their homes were much more connected to the outside world. Cold air could enter through openings. Sounds could travel through narrow streets. Rain could be heard against roofs and stone. And the darkness outside was much darker than the darkness we know today, once the sun disappeared. There were very few sources of light: an oil lamp, a candle, a fire, perhaps the moon, and that changed the feeling of the entire city. Imagine turning off every electric light in a modern neighborhood. The streets would become almost completely dark. Now imagine that this is normal, every night, for your entire life. Night would not simply be a different time of day. It would be another world, a slower world, a world in which distance was measured by the small circles of light created by lamps. And perhaps that is why the little lights of Rome feel so important when we imagine the city at night. A single lamp beside a doorway could transform a dark street. It could illuminate a few stones, a wooden door, a person's hands, and perhaps nothing more. Beyond that small circle of light was darkness. A servant carrying such a lamp would become briefly visible. Then, as he walked away, the light would move with him, the doorway would disappear again, the street would return to shadow, and somewhere else, another lamp would appear, then another, tiny islands of warmth scattered through the sleeping city. There was also the question of safety. Rome was not a peaceful modern neighborhood with streetlights and emergency services. The darkness made movement more difficult. Some streets were narrow, some were poorly lit, and after the busiest hours, fewer people were around. Yet people still traveled. Work did not always end when the sun went down. Some people worked late. Some people arrived in the city after dark. Others had reasons to be outside that could not wait until morning. And so the night had its own population, not as large as the daytime crowd, but still present. A few workers, a few travelers, servants, watchmen, people returning home, people looking for food, people looking for somewhere to sleep, and perhaps somewhere in the darkness. Someone who had simply stayed out later than they intended. The city never stopped completely. It only became quieter, much quieter. If you were walking through Rome at this hour, you might begin to notice things that disappeared during the day. The sound of your own footsteps, the uneven surface beneath your sandals, the smell of smoke coming from a distant kitchen, the faint warmth escaping through a doorway, the flicker of a lamp reflected in a wet patch of stone, the smell of bread from a bakery preparing for morning, and above everything, the darkness of the sky. The stars would have been much easier to see. There were no electric signs, no office buildings glowing through the night, no headlights moving endlessly along distant roads. The sky belonged to the stars. And perhaps someone standing on a rooftop in Rome might have looked upward, just as people do today. Perhaps they wondered about tomorrow. Perhaps they thought about someone they loved. Perhaps they were worried about money. Perhaps they were simply tired. The problems of ordinary life have a strange way of surviving across thousands of years. The clothes change, the buildings change, the language changes, but tiredness remains, hunger remains, the desire for warmth remains, the wish to find a safe place to sleep remains. And so, when we imagine an ordinary Roman going to bed, there is something strangely familiar about it. The lamp is lowered. The room becomes darker. The day's sounds become distant. Someone pulls a blanket closer. A child turns in their sleep. The last fire begins to fade, and eventually the house becomes quiet, outside. Rome continues beneath the stars. One lamp burns beside a doorway. Another flickers somewhere farther down the street. The baker is still working. The traveler is still searching. And slowly, very slowly, the number of people awake begins to fall, one by one. The lights of Rome begin to disappear. By the time the last lamps began to disappear, the streets of Rome had become very different from the city of the day. The noise had faded. The markets were closed, the workshops were quiet, and the people who remained outside seemed to move more carefully through the darkness. For those who still had somewhere to go, the shortest route home was often the best route. A narrow street, a familiar doorway, a few lamps along the way, and then home. But not everyone knew the city so well. For a traveler arriving late, Rome could be confusing. The streets did not form the neat grid we might imagine from a modern city. Some roads curved around older buildings. Some became narrower as they continued. Others opened suddenly into small courtyards or public spaces. A person who knew the neighborhood would understand these turns without thinking. A stranger might not. So imagine the traveler again. He walks beneath another oil lamp. The flame moves slightly in the night air. He looks toward a doorway. Nothing. He continues. Another doorway. Still nothing. Then farther ahead he notices a small light. Perhaps an inn. Perhaps a private home. Perhaps simply another lamp burning beside the road. He walks toward it. Slowly. There is no reason to hurry. The night is already deep, and Rome will still be there in the morning. This was one of the strange qualities of ancient cities. They could feel enormous during the day, and surprisingly intimate at night. The same streets that had been filled with people could become almost empty. The same buildings that had seemed noisy and crowded could become silent walls. And the same people who had spent the day moving through the city were now behind those walls, eating, talking, resting, sleeping. Somewhere inside one of the houses, a family might still be awake. A small fire would provide warmth. A lamp would burn beside a table. Perhaps someone would be preparing tomorrow's clothes. Perhaps a mother would be settling a child into bed. Perhaps an old man would be sitting quietly near the fire. The details would have been ordinary, and that is exactly why they are difficult to see in the historical record. History tends to preserve unusual things. Wars, earthquakes, political decisions, the names of powerful people. But ordinary evenings rarely leave behind written records. Nobody writes a famous inscription about the moment a Roman father lowered an oil lamp before going to sleep. Nobody records the exact conversation between two neighbors at the end of a long day. Nobody writes down how tired a baker felt after working through the night. And yet, these small moments were repeated thousands upon thousands of times, every night, across the city. That is what made Rome a living city. Not only its monuments, not only its armies, but the enormous number of ordinary lives happening at the same time. A person cooking, a person washing, a person working, a person waiting, a person worrying, a person sleeping. Thousands of small lives, all beneath the same dark sky. And perhaps now we can slow down too. There is no need to follow the traveler anymore. We can let him disappear around the corner. The sound of his footsteps becomes softer, then softer still, until eventually we cannot hear him at all. Instead, we notice the rain. At first, only a few drops. They fall onto the ancient stones, one, then another. The pavement begins to darken. The warm light from the oil lamp spreads across the wet surface. The street becomes reflective, quiet, almost dreamlike. Rain was not unusual in Rome. And when it came at night, it could transform the entire city. Dust settled. Stone became darker. Sounds became softer. People moved indoors. Doorways closed. And the streets that had been busy during the day became even quieter. Imagine standing beneath the shelter of a Roman doorway now. You can hear the rain falling just beyond the roof. You can see the small flame of a lamp nearby. Its reflection trembles on the wet stones. There is nobody passing, no merchant calling out, no cart moving through the street, no crowd, only rain, and the soft, almost invisible movement of the flame. Inside the house behind you, someone has already gone to sleep. The room is dark. The fire has become a faint red glow. A blanket rests over a sleeping child. Another person turns quietly in their sleep. And outside, The rain continues. This is the kind of moment that history almost never describes, but it may have happened thousands of times. A Roman night, a closed door, a little lamp, a quiet room, and rain falling beyond the walls. If you had been standing there, you might not have thought about the future. You would not have known that centuries later, people would dig through these streets searching for traces of your world. You would not have known that the buildings around you would eventually collapse, that roads would disappear beneath later streets, that homes would become ruins, that ordinary objects would be buried beneath layers of earth. You would simply have been there, living your life, listening to the rain, waiting for morning. And perhaps that is the most peaceful way to imagine the ancient world. Not as something grand and distant, but as a collection of ordinary nights, one after another. A night in a small house, a night in a bakery, a night on the road, a night beneath a roof, a night beneath the stars. The centuries may separate us, but night itself is familiar. The darkness arrives, the world becomes quieter, the day's work comes to an end, and eventually we all look for somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere quiet enough to sleep. In Rome, thousands of years ago, the same night was beginning to settle over everyone. The rich, the poor, the worker, the traveler, the child, the old, the people whose names history remembered, and the people whose names disappeared completely. They all lived beneath the same sky, and tonight, for a little while, we can imagine walking among them, not rushing, not searching for anything important, just following the quiet streets, one lamp at a time. The rain continues for a while, and slowly, even the sounds of the city begin to disappear. There is less movement now, fewer footsteps, fewer voices. The lamps burn lower, and behind the walls of the houses, another quiet part of the night begins. For many people, sleep would not have come in the same way it does for us. There were no electric lights to switch off, no alarm clocks waiting for the morning, no glowing screen beside the bed. The rhythm of the night was much more closely connected to the natural world. Darkness arrived with the sunset, and darkness remained until morning. Inside a modest Roman home, the last lamp might still be burning. Its small flame would illuminate only part of the room. The rest would remain in shadow. A wooden table, a clay vessel, a few simple household objects, a folded piece of cloth, perhaps some bread left from the evening meal. Nothing extraordinary, just the remains of another ordinary day. Someone might sit beside the lamp for a little longer, perhaps talking quietly, perhaps thinking about the next morning, perhaps simply enjoying the warmth before going to bed. The Romans had many different ways of living. Some families had larger homes with courtyards and several rooms. Others lived in much smaller spaces. And many people in Rome lived in insular, multi-story apartment buildings that housed numerous families. Life inside these buildings could be crowded. The wealthy could afford more privacy. Ordinary workers often had much less. But once the night became quiet, the difference between one home and another could become harder to see from the street. A window glowing above a narrow road was simply a window glowing in the darkness. Someone was awake. Someone was resting. Someone was living their life. And perhaps several floors above the street, a child was already asleep. The adults were speaking more softly now. The day had been long. There was nothing left that needed to be done. Eventually, the lamp would be extinguished. The room would become dark, and the family would settle into sleep. Outside, the rain would continue to fall, drop by drop, quietly, patiently. There is something comforting about rain at night. It gives the world a sound without asking anything from us. You do not have to follow it. You do not have to understand it. You can simply listen. And perhaps the people of Rome felt something similar. A Roman lying awake in the darkness could hear the rain against the roof. Perhaps the sound helped cover the noises of the street. Perhaps it made the room feel warmer. Perhaps it simply became part of the background of sleep. And beyond the houses, the city continued to breathe. Water moved along the streets. The wind passed between the buildings. A lamp flickered beside a doorway. Somewhere, a late worker was still awake. Somewhere else, a traveler had finally found a place to sleep. And somewhere beyond the walls of the city, the countryside was almost completely dark. There were no city lights stretching toward the horizon. No glowing buildings in the distance, only scattered fires, small settlements, and the enormous darkness of the night. Above it all, the stars, the same stars that would have been seen from the rooftops of Rome, the same stars that appeared above the Mediterranean, the same stars that had watched over the city for generations. For someone standing outside at this hour, the sky must have seemed enormous, and perhaps for a moment the worries of the day became smaller. The city below was quiet, the streets were wet, the lamps were few, and the night seemed to stretch without an end. Imagine walking slowly now. There is no destination. There is no reason to hurry. You pass beneath an archway. The rain is lighter here. A lamp hangs from the wall. Its flame moves gently. You continue. The street opens into a small courtyard. In the center is a simple fountain. Water falls quietly into the basin. There is nobody there. The buildings around the courtyard are dark. A few windows still glow faintly. You stop for a moment. Listen. Water, rain, wind. Nothing more. Then you continue walking. Another doorway, another wall, another small lamp. The city seems endless, but at this hour it is almost empty. And the farther you walk, the less important everything seems. You are no longer looking for famous buildings. You are no longer thinking about emperors. You are simply moving through the night. This is the quiet Rome. The Rome that existed between one day and the next. The Rome of people sleeping behind walls, of lamps burning low, of bread being prepared for morning, of rain falling onto ancient stone. And slowly, morning is getting closer. Not yet, there is still darkness, but somewhere beyond the horizon, the night will eventually begin to fade. The baker will finish his work. The traveler will finally rest. The families inside their homes will remain asleep, and the first workers of the new day will begin to wake. But for now, Rome is still sleeping, the lamps are still burning, the rain is still falling, and the stars are still above the rooftops, so we can stay here a little longer. There is nowhere else we need to go. The city can wait until morning. For now, let the streets remain quiet. Let the lamps burn softly. Let the rain fall, and let the ancient city rest. The night has grown deeper now. The rain has almost stopped. Only a few drops remain, falling from the edges of roofs and balconies. The streets are darker than before, but Rome has not completely disappeared. Somewhere in the distance, a small fire is still burning. Somewhere else, a lamp is being carried slowly through the darkness. And somewhere beneath the quiet streets, another part of the city is still awake. Rome was not only a city of houses and streets, it was also a city of work. Every morning, thousands of people needed food: bread, wine, olives, vegetables, fish, meat, water, clothing, tools. And all of these things had to be prepared, moved, and sold. Much of that work happened during the day. but some of it began long before sunrise. The baker was one example. So were the people who worked in markets and food preparation. If you wanted fresh bread in the morning, someone had to begin making it during the night. If food needed to be prepared, someone had to wake before everyone else. And if goods needed to arrive in the city, someone had to move them before the streets became crowded. So while many Romans slept, the earliest workers were already beginning the next day. Imagine the bakery again. The fire has burned for hours. The room is warm. The baker's hands move slowly. There is flour on the wooden table. There is flour on his clothing. The small lamp beside him has burned low. Outside, the sky is still completely dark. He looks toward the doorway. Nothing. The city is quiet. He returns to his work. Press. Fold. Turn. Again. And again. By the time the first light appears, the bread will be ready. People will wake. Doors will open. And the city will begin moving once more. The baker will have already finished part of his day. That is one of the strange things about living in a city. Some people's mornings begin while other people are still dreaming, and Rome was no different. There were always people whose schedules existed outside the rhythm of the majority. Workers who began before sunrise, people who traveled late, servants who answered the needs of wealthy households, guards and watchmen who remained alert while others slept. Their lives were connected to the city's rhythms, but they did not always follow them. The night belonged to them, at least for a few hours. And perhaps this is why the darkness of ancient Rome was never completely empty. There were always small movements, a door opening, a lamp passing through an alley, a person crossing a courtyard, a distant voice, a fire being fed, a cart arriving somewhere outside the center of the city. Small signs of life, almost hidden inside the darkness. And then there were the animals, dogs sleeping near doorways, donkeys resting after a day of carrying goods, horses standing quietly in courtyards, birds hidden somewhere in the darkness. The city was not silent in the way an empty room is silent. It had its own nighttime sounds, the occasional bark, the movement of an animal, the creak of wood, the soft splash of water, the wind moving through narrow streets, and underneath all of it, the constant presence of human life. Even when you could not see anyone, someone was probably awake somewhere nearby. Perhaps an old man sitting beside a small fire, perhaps a servant preparing water, perhaps a traveler lying awake in an unfamiliar room, perhaps a mother checking on a sleeping child. The city was full of invisible lives, lives happening behind walls, lives that left almost no record, and perhaps that is what makes the night so interesting. During the day, a city shows itself. At night, it hides. You begin to notice the small things, the light beneath a door, the sound behind a wall, the shadow of someone passing a window, the smell of smoke, the warmth of a kitchen. You begin to imagine what is happening inside the buildings, and suddenly, the darkness does not feel empty anymore. It feels full, full of people, full of quiet routines, full of lives that continue whether anyone is watching or not. Imagine now that you are standing beneath a covered passage. The stones beneath your feet are still wet from the rain. The air is cool. There is a faint smell of damp earth and smoke. A lamp burns a few steps away. Its flame moves gently. You can see the old stone walls. You can see the wooden doors, but you cannot see very far beyond the lamp. The street disappears into shadow. You wait. For a moment, nothing happens. Then you hear footsteps, very faint. Someone is approaching. The sound grows slightly louder. One step, then another. A figure appears briefly inside the circle of light, a person carrying a small bundle. They pass you without saying anything. The footsteps continue, and then they disappear into the darkness. Just like that, the street is quiet again. This was the rhythm of the ancient city. Appear, disappear, appear, disappear. Small moments of human life moving through a much larger darkness. And perhaps the person you just saw was going home. Perhaps they were going to work. Perhaps they had been visiting someone. We cannot know, but we can imagine, because the night belongs to imagination. It leaves space between the things we know, and in those spaces, we can begin to picture the people who lived here, not as statues, not as names carved into stone, but as tired human beings, people who became hungry, people who became cold, people who laughed, people who worried, people who loved their families, people who wanted tomorrow to be easier than today, and eventually, people who closed their eyes and slept. The hours pass slowly. The city becomes darker, then quieter, then still. The baker has finished another batch of bread. The traveler has finally found a place to rest. The servant has returned to the household. The families behind the walls are sleeping. The lamps are burning lower, and somewhere above the city, the stars remain. The same darkness surrounds the rooftops. The same moon moves slowly across the sky. The same night air passes through the streets. Nothing is asking you to hurry. Nothing needs to happen. For now, Rome can simply be quiet, and we can simply listen. The streets have become quieter now. Most of the people who needed to travel have already reached their destinations. The baker has returned to his work. The traveler has finally found somewhere to rest. And behind the closed doors of the city, thousands of people are sleeping. But Rome could never completely relax. Even at night, there were people whose work was to remain awake, while most of the city slept. They watched. They walked through the streets. They listened for unusual sounds. They looked for signs of trouble. And in a city built largely from wood, brick, and tightly packed buildings, one danger was especially feared: fire. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, not because someone has called your name, but because you smell smoke. At first, there is almost nothing. A faint smell in the air, a little warmth where there should be none. Then, somewhere beyond the wall, a shout. Another voice answers. A door opens. Someone steps into the street. And suddenly, the quiet night is no longer quiet. Fire was a serious danger in ancient Rome. The city was densely populated. Buildings could stand close together, and many homes depended on open flames for cooking and heating. Oil lamps burned beside wooden objects. Cooking fires remained warm after meals. In workshops, furnaces and ovens could stay active for long periods. A small accident could become something much larger. And when buildings stood close together, fire could spread quickly. This was one reason Rome developed organized firefighting forces. During the reign of Augustus, a permanent corps known as the Vigils was established. Their responsibilities included watching for fires and responding when they occurred. The Vigils were not simply ordinary soldiers. They were a specialized force whose work was closely connected to the safety of the city. Their nights were very different from those of the people sleeping behind the walls, while families rested. The Vigils remained awake. Imagine one of them walking through the darkness. His route takes him past closed shops, quiet courtyards, apartment buildings, and narrow streets. The city is almost completely still. He hears the sound of his own footsteps. A lamp burns somewhere above him. A dog moves behind a doorway, Nothing seems unusual. He continues walking. Another street. Another corner, another dark building. Then, a faint orange light appears in the distance. He stops. For a moment he simply watches. Is it a lamp, a kitchen fire, or something more serious? He moves closer. The smell becomes stronger. Smoke. Now there are voices. A window opens above the street. Someone is calling for help. The quiet night has changed in only a few moments, and the vigils have to move quickly. Ancient firefighting was very different from what we know today. There were no modern engines, no pressurized hoses, no tall ladders reaching effortlessly toward the upper floors. Instead, firefighters relied on equipment and methods suited to the technology of their time. Water, buckets, pumps, axes, hooks, and sometimes the simplest method of all, creating space between the flames and whatever had not yet burned. When a fire became too large to control directly, buildings might be pulled down to create a break. It was a harsh solution, but in a densely packed city, sometimes stopping the fire meant sacrificing part of a building to save the rest of the neighborhood. Imagine watching this from a doorway. The night sky is suddenly orange. Smoke rises between the buildings. People have come outside. Some carry water. Others move possessions away from the flames. Children are pulled back from the street. Neighbors shout to one another. The same streets that had been almost silent only minutes earlier are now filled with movement. And yet, eventually, the fire begins to weaken. The orange glow becomes smaller. The smoke becomes thinner. The voices become quieter. One by one, people return indoors. The street slowly settles again. Perhaps someone stays outside a little longer, watching the last embers. Then the night returns. Not quite the same as before, but quiet again. This is another side of ancient Rome. The city could be beautiful at night. The lamps, the stars, the quiet streets, the warm light behind the windows. But beneath that peaceful surface was a city that required constant attention. Thousands of people living close together. Thousands of cooking fires. Thousands of lamps. Thousands of wooden objects. Thousands of lives depending on the people who stayed awake while everyone else slept. And perhaps that is why the silence of Rome feels different now. Because somewhere within that silence, someone was always listening. A watchman, a firefighter, a servant, a traveler, a baker preparing the first bread of the morning. The city was asleep, but it was never completely unattended. Slowly, the last signs of the fire disappear. The streets become dark again. A few people return to their homes. A door closes. A lamp is lowered. And once again, the sounds of Rome become softer. The danger has passed. The night continues. Above the rooftops, the stars remain exactly where they were. And the people who had been awakened by the fire begin to settle back into their beds. Perhaps their hearts are still beating a little faster. Perhaps someone checks the door one more time. Then, silence. The kind of silence that comes only after a disturbance has ended, and as the city settles again. We can leave the watchmen behind. Their footsteps will continue through the night, but our walk takes us somewhere quieter, away from the streets, away from the fires, and toward the places where travelers finally found shelter. Because not everyone who walked through Rome at night had a home waiting for them. Some had only arrived, some were passing through, and some were simply looking for a warm room, a little food, and somewhere to sleep until morning. Somewhere beyond the streets where the fire had finally gone out. Another kind of nighttime activity was beginning to settle into silence. Not everyone in Rome had a home waiting for them. Some people had arrived from distant parts of the empire. Some were merchants. Some were workers looking for employment. Some were travelers passing through on their way somewhere else. And when darkness came, they needed somewhere to stay. For a traveler arriving late in Rome, finding a place to sleep was not always simple. The city was enormous. The streets were unfamiliar. And after sunset, many businesses had already closed their doors. So imagine the traveler we met earlier. He has been walking for some time now. The streets have become quieter. His feet are tired. The small bag hanging from his shoulder feels heavier than it did earlier in the day. He turns a corner and notices a little light ahead. Not the light of a private home. This one is different. There is a doorway that is still open. Warm light spills onto the street. A few voices can be heard from inside. For the first time in a while, he knows that he may have found somewhere to rest. He approaches slowly. Inside is a modest lodging house. The room is not luxurious. There are no grand decorations, no marble halls, no magnificent furniture. Just the things a tired traveler actually needs. A place to sit, something to eat, a little water, and somewhere to sleep. For someone who has been walking since morning, that can be enough. The traveler steps inside. The warmth is immediately noticeable. After the cool night air outside, even a simple room feels comfortable. There are other travelers inside. One is already eating. Another is speaking quietly with the person beside him. Someone near the wall is preparing a small bundle of belongings before going to sleep. The sounds are low. Nobody is celebrating. Nobody is in a hurry. The day is over, and everyone knows it. The traveler finds a place to sit. Perhaps he is offered a simple meal. Bread, olives, maybe some wine, nothing elaborate. But after a long journey, even a simple meal can feel generous. Food and shelter were important parts of travel in the ancient world. Travel itself could be tiring and uncertain. Roads connected Rome to distant parts of the empire, but journeys still depended on weather, safety, available transport, and the condition of the roads. A traveler could spend days moving from one place to another, and every evening brought the same question: where will I sleep tonight? For some travelers, the answer was a roadside stopping place. For others, it might be an inn or lodging house. And sometimes, it may have depended on hospitality from friends, relatives, or acquaintances. The ancient traveler therefore carried more than a bag. He carried uncertainty. He did not always know exactly where the evening would end. And perhaps that made the sight of a warm doorway in the darkness especially comforting. Imagine sitting inside that room now. Outside, Rome is dark. Inside, a small lamp burns. The light falls across wooden furniture. A clay cup sits on a table. Someone quietly sets down a bowl. Another traveler yawns. Someone else has already fallen asleep. The room smells faintly of smoke, food, and damp clothing. It is not luxurious, but it is warm, and for tonight, that is enough. The traveler removes his sandals. His feet are sore from the road. He places his belongings beside him. For the first time since entering the city, he does not need to keep walking. He can stop. He can breathe. He can rest. Perhaps he looks toward the small window. Outside, a few oil lamps are still visible. The rain has left the stones dark and reflective. A person passes in the distance, then disappears. The traveler watches for a moment, and then turns back toward the room. The conversation around him becomes quieter. One person finishes eating. Another lowers the lamp. The room becomes darker. The traveler lies down. The bed is simple, Perhaps only a mattress or a thin layer of bedding. But after a long journey, even a simple bed can feel like a luxury. He closes his eyes. The sounds of the room slowly disappear. A quiet cough, the movement of cloth, a wooden floor creaking, then silence. Outside, another traveler is still searching for a place to stay. Perhaps he will find a room nearby. Perhaps he will have to walk a little farther. Rome is still large, still dark, still awake in a few places. But for the traveler who has finally found shelter, the city has become very small. There is only this room, this lamp, this bed, and the quiet knowledge that morning is still several hours away. This is one of the softer sides of ancient travel. We often imagine journeys as grand adventures, ships crossing seas, armies marching across provinces, merchants carrying valuable goods, roads stretching toward distant cities. But most journeys were also made of small moments, waiting, walking, eating, resting, looking for shelter, waking before sunrise, and continuing again. The traveler did not need a monument. He did not need a grand palace. He only needed somewhere safe enough to close his eyes. And tonight, he has found it. The lamp beside him burns lower. The room becomes darker. Outside, the streets remain quiet. A faint breeze moves through the doorway. Someone closes a wooden shutter. The last voices inside the lodging house disappear. And gradually, the entire building settles into sleep. The traveler is no longer thinking about the road. He is no longer thinking about tomorrow. For a few hours, there is nothing to decide, nothing to search for, nothing to carry, only darkness, warmth, and rest. And somewhere beyond the walls, Rome continues beneath the stars. Another traveler may still be walking. Another lamp may still be burning. Another door may still be open. But here, inside this small room, the night has finally become quiet, and the traveler sleeps. Not every door in Rome was closing for the night, while the traveler finally rested in his small room. Somewhere else in the city, a warm light was still shining onto the street. The smell of cooked food drifted into the cool night air. A few voices could be heard behind an open doorway. Someone laughed softly. Someone placed a cup on a wooden table. And somewhere inside, food was still being served. This was another side of Roman life at night, the taverna, the small shops and eating places that opened directly onto the streets. Some sold wine, some sold bread, some offered prepared food, and some could provide a simple place to sit, drink, and talk. One of the most interesting examples was the Thermopolium, a place where hot food and drinks were sold. We know quite a lot about these places because many were preserved in Roman cities, such as Pompeii. Their counters often contained large ceramic vessels set directly into the masonry. These containers could hold food and drink. A small oven or cooking area could keep things warm. From the street, the counter was visible almost immediately. There was no need to enter a grand dining room. You simply approached the counter, looked at what was available, and ordered something. For many ordinary people, this was extremely practical. Not everyone living in a crowded Roman apartment had a proper kitchen. Some insulae had limited facilities for cooking, and when the day was long, buying something hot from a nearby food shop could be easier than preparing a meal at home. So imagine the street again. It is late, most of the shops are dark, but one doorway is still open. Warm light spills across the pavement. Inside, a small fire is burning. Steam rises from a vessel. The smell of cooked food fills the room. Someone is standing behind the counter. A customer waits. Perhaps he has just finished work. Perhaps he has been walking through the city for hours. Perhaps he simply does not want to go home hungry. He places a few coins on the counter. A bowl is set down in front of him. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would appear in a palace. Just a warm meal, served late at night. And sometimes, that is exactly what a tired person needs. The food available in Roman eating places could vary. Bread was common. So were legumes and other simple foods. There could be fish, meat, vegetables, olives, and sauces. Wine was also an important part of Roman drinking culture. It was often mixed with water rather than consumed in the same way modern wine is usually served. The food was practical. The portions did not need to be enormous. The purpose was simple: to eat, to drink, to rest for a while, and perhaps to talk. Because these places were not only about food, they were places where people met. A worker might sit beside a traveler. A shopkeeper might speak with a customer. Neighbors might stop for a drink. Someone might hear a rumor about something happening across the city. Someone else might complain about the price of food. Another person might simply sit quietly, too tired to say much at all. The evening could stretch on. The lamps would burn. The fire would crackle. The smell of cooking would remain in the air, and outside, the streets would slowly become darker. Imagine sitting there for a moment. You are near the doorway. The night air is cool behind you. Inside, the room is warm. A small flame moves beneath a cooking vessel. The light catches the edge of a clay cup. Someone pours a little wine. Another person tears a piece of bread. A quiet conversation continues at the next table. You do not understand every word. You do not need to. The sound of human voices is enough. It makes the room feel alive. This is something we can recognize even after 2,000 years. There are places where people go not because they have somewhere important to be, but because they want to sit among other people for a little while. A place to eat, a place to drink, a place to hear familiar voices, a place where the night does not feel quite so empty. And yet, the Romans did not always admire these places. Some members of the upper classes looked down on taverns and public eating places. They could associate them with drinking, disorder, and people they considered socially inferior. But moral opinions do not tell us everything about ordinary life. The archaeological remains tell another story. These establishments existed because people used them. Again and again, day after day, night after night. They were part of the practical life of the city, and after dark, they could become small islands of warmth, a few lamps, a little food, a little wine, a few people talking quietly. Perhaps someone laughs, perhaps someone tells a story, perhaps two strangers discover that they have traveled along the same road. Perhaps a worker complains about tomorrow's early start. Perhaps someone is already half asleep at the table. The night continues, slowly, without hurry. Outside, another person passes the doorway. For a moment, the warm light falls across their face. Then they disappear into the darkness. Inside, the conversation continues. The fire burns lower. The food becomes less plentiful. The owner begins to think about closing. One by one, the customers finish their meals. A cup is placed on the counter. A wooden stool is pushed back. Someone stands. Another person wraps a cloak around their shoulders. The night air enters through the doorway. It is colder now. The streets have become almost completely quiet. The owner looks outside. There are only a few lamps left burning along the road. Perhaps it is finally time to close. The last customer steps into the street. The door remains open for another moment. Warm light stretches across the stones. Then, The door closes, the light disappears, and once again, Rome becomes dark, but somewhere farther away. Another taverna may still be open. Another small fire may still be burning. Another traveler may still be eating. Another conversation may still be taking place. The city has thousands of stories happening at once. Some are loud, most are quiet. And almost all of them will disappear without leaving a name behind. The traveler in the inn is sleeping now. The baker is working. The watchmen are walking. The families are resting. And somewhere in a small room beside a dark Roman street, someone is finishing the last sip of wine before going home. The night is becoming deeper. The lamps are becoming fewer. The voices are becoming softer. And gradually, even the places that stayed awake for the night begin to close. The fires are reduced to embers. The counters are cleaned. The cups are put away. The doors are pulled shut. And the warm smells of food slowly disappear into the cold night air. For a little while, the city becomes quiet again, not empty, not dead, just resting. And above the rooftops, the stars remain. The same stars that watched over the traveler, the same stars that watched over the baker, the same stars that watched over the watchmen. And now, the same stars shine above the closed taverna. The night has taken another step toward morning, but there is still time, still darkness, still silence, and still a little warmth behind the walls. Perhaps now we can return to the question we asked earlier. What was the most dangerous thing about walking through Rome at night? The answer was not simply one particular danger. It was the darkness itself, and everything that became harder to see because of it. During the day, Rome was crowded. The streets were full of people. Shopkeepers stood outside their businesses. Travelers moved through the city. Workers carried goods. Neighbors spoke to one another. There were voices everywhere. And all those people created a kind of safety. If something happened, someone was likely to notice. But at night, the city changed. The streets became darker. The crowds disappeared. And the distance between one person and the next became much greater. For someone walking alone, that could be unsettling. A person could turn a corner and suddenly find themselves on an almost empty street. The small circle of light from an oil lamp might illuminate only a few steps ahead. Beyond that, there was darkness. You could hear something without knowing exactly where it came from. Footsteps behind you, a door opening, a voice somewhere beyond the wall. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was someone returning home. But in the darkness, you could not always be certain. This was one of the fundamental problems of nighttime travel. You could not see very far, and when you cannot see, you have less control over what might happen next. There were also people who took advantage of the darkness. Rome had its share of theft and street crime. A person carrying money or valuable goods could become a tempting target. Travelers unfamiliar with the city could be especially vulnerable. Someone who knew the streets could disappear quickly into a side passage. Someone who did not know the neighborhood might not know where to go. So imagine walking through Rome alone. Your footsteps are quiet. The buildings rise on either side of you. A lamp burns ahead. You walk toward it. For a moment, the street becomes visible. Then the lamp is behind you. And everything ahead becomes dark again. You hear another set of footsteps. You slow down. The footsteps slow down too. You look back. Nothing, only an empty street. You continue. The sound disappears. Perhaps it was simply another traveler. Perhaps someone returning home. You will never know. But the feeling remains, and that feeling was part of nighttime life. There were other dangers too. Rome's streets were not designed for modern nighttime travel. They could be narrow, they could be uneven. And in a city where people, animals, and carts shared limited space, moving around after dark required attention. A person could stumble on an uneven stone. A sudden movement could come from a doorway. An animal could pass unexpectedly, and in the darkness. Even ordinary things became harder to predict. There was also the problem of waste. Ancient Rome did have systems for managing waste, but the streets were not the clean, carefully regulated spaces we might imagine today. People lived closely together. Water, mud, animals, and human activity all contributed to the difficult conditions of urban life. After rain, the streets could become especially unpleasant. The stones became slippery. Water gathered in low places. The light from lamps reflected across the wet pavement. And a traveler trying to move quickly through the darkness had to watch every step. But perhaps the greatest danger was not always something physical. It was uncertainty, not knowing what was waiting around the next corner. Not knowing who might be walking behind you, not knowing whether the light ahead belonged to a friendly home, a busy tavern, or simply another empty street. For someone who knew Rome well, these things were probably less frightening. They knew which streets to take. They knew where the familiar lamps were. They knew which doorways belonged to friends. They knew when a street was usually quiet. But for a stranger, Rome at night could feel enormous. And perhaps this is why travelers often preferred to find shelter before the city became too dark. Once inside, the streets could disappear behind a wooden door. The noise outside became distant. The danger of the road was temporarily over, and the traveler could finally rest. So if you guessed that the greatest danger was simply darkness, you were closer than you might have expected. Not because darkness itself could hurt you, but because it made everything else more uncertain. It reduced visibility. It reduced communication. It reduced the number of people around you. And it gave the city a completely different character. The same street that felt ordinary in daylight could feel unfamiliar at night. The same doorway that looked harmless in the afternoon could seem mysterious after sunset. The same footsteps that meant nothing during the day could make you turn around at night. And yet, millions of nights passed. People still walked home. Workers still traveled. Watchmen still made their rounds. Travelers still searched for inns. And families still waited behind closed doors. Most nights probably ended quietly. A person reached home. A lamp was lowered. A door was closed. And another ordinary day came to an end. That is perhaps the most important part of the story. Rome at night was not a place of constant danger. It was a real city, with ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives. There was risk, there was uncertainty, but there was also routine. And after enough nights, people learned how to move through their city. They knew where to go, they knew what to avoid, they knew when to return home, they knew which lights meant safety. And slowly, the darkness became familiar. Just as night eventually becomes familiar to anyone who lives in a place for long enough. The traveler we followed earlier has already discovered this. He found a room, he closed the door, and now he is sleeping. The watchmen continue walking. The last taverns are closing. The baker is finishing his work. The families behind their walls remain asleep. And Rome, after everything that happened during the night, has become quiet once again. The answer to our question has finally been revealed. The greatest danger was not some mysterious creature waiting in the shadows. It was the simple uncertainty of moving through a huge ancient city. when the sun was gone, and the streets belonged to the darkness. But now, even that darkness is beginning to change, very slowly, almost imperceptibly. The night is approaching its final hours. The deepest part of sleep has arrived. The fires have burned low. The lamps are almost empty. The streets are still. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, the sky is beginning to soften. Not yet morning, not quite, but soon. The long Roman night is coming to an end. So let us take one final walk through the city before the first light appears. There is no need to hurry. Streets can remain quiet for a little longer. The people can remain asleep. The lamps can continue to flicker just for a few more moments, and we can watch. As ancient Rome slowly waits for another day, the night is almost over now, but Rome is still quiet. The streets remain empty, the doors remain closed, and behind the walls of the city, most people are still asleep. Outside, a light rain has begun to fall again, very softly. The first drops touch the ancient stones, one by one. They darken the pavement. The lamps that survived the night are still burning. Their flames are smaller now, tired, almost ready to disappear. Rain falls around them, and each small flame creates a faint golden reflection on the wet stones. There is no crowd now, no merchants, no carts, no voices calling from the streets, only the rain and the occasional movement of the wind. Somewhere inside the city, a baker is preparing the first bread of the morning, but for most people, the day has not begun yet. A family is still sleeping behind a closed door. A child is still beneath a blanket. A traveler is still resting in a small room. A watchman is finishing the last part of his long night. And somewhere above them, the sky is beginning to change, very slowly. The darkness is no longer completely black. Beyond the rooftops, a faint grey light is appearing. It is almost impossible to notice at first, but the night is beginning to retreat. The rain continues, softly, patiently. The city does not wake all at once. There is no sudden moment when Rome becomes alive again. Instead, one small thing happens. A door opens somewhere. A little light appears behind a window. A bird moves beneath the roof. Someone wakes, then another, and somewhere in the distance, the first sounds of morning begin, but the streets are still mostly quiet. For a few more moments, Rome belongs to the rain. Imagine standing beneath the roof of a quiet doorway. You are sheltered from the rain. The stones in front of you are wet. The last lamp beside the street is flickering. Its light is reflected in the pavement. Beyond it, the road disappears into the soft grey darkness. You can hear the rain falling from the roofs. You can hear water moving slowly along the stones. Nothing else. No music, no voices, no footsteps, just rain, and the quiet breathing of a city waiting for morning. The people who lived here thousands of years ago would have known this moment. The end of one night, the beginning of another day. They would have woken soon. The streets would become busy again. The markets would open. The voices would return. Bread would be carried through the streets. Animals would begin moving. Shops would open their doors. And Rome would become loud once again. But not yet. For now, the city is still sleeping. The rain is still falling. And the last lamps are still burning. The traveler we followed through the night is still asleep. The baker has almost finished his work. The watchmen are almost ready to return home. The families behind their doors have not yet opened their eyes. And above them, the first light of morning slowly spreads across the sky. The rooftops begin to appear. The outlines of the buildings become clearer. The darkness becomes softer. and the rain continues to fall. There is something peaceful about this moment. After all the movement of the night, after the footsteps, the fires, the travelers, the conversations, the lamps, the streets, everything has become still again. The city has survived another night, and soon another day will begin. But you do not need to follow that day. You do not need to hear the markets open. You do not need to follow the crowds. You do not need to watch Rome become busy again. We can stay here, just before morning, under the soft rain, beside the quiet streets, with the last lamp glowing beside us. The ancient city is resting, and for a little while, so can we. Let the rain continue. Let the streets remain quiet. Let the last light fade slowly. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to do. The morning can wait. For now, Rome is still asleep. The rain falls gently over the ancient stones. The rooftops disappear into the mist. The last lamp grows dim, and somewhere beyond the walls, the sky becomes a little brighter, then a little brighter still. But the city remains peaceful, quiet, still. And for one final moment, we can simply listen to the rain, to the wind, to the distant sounds of a city beginning to breathe. Ancient Rome is waking, but slowly, very slowly. And perhaps we can remain here just a little longer. Good night.